Hi, this is Paul, and this is my rough draft for Sunday video. Whenever I do this, I always think, how rough is this draft? Some weeks it's pretty rough, and a fair amount of sermonizing goes on between Friday and Sunday, even if I don't technically touch it on Saturday. Sunday morning I usually get up and work on it and polish it off, and then hopefully we'll see if it flies by 11 o'clock. Freddie's here in the sanctuary today. Freddie called me. I want to practice my raps, and so he's practicing his raps, and he swears he'll leave me alone so I can get my work done. He's not real good at that, so I told him I'd see him in an hour, and it'll probably be 15 minutes. So if I get interrupted, I get interrupted. I've been trying to keep my church a little bit up to date on what I do with my videos, since they pay for my time, and then inevitably some of my church time gets into making videos, and I do see this as a part of my ministry as a pastor. It's also part of my hobby and avocation. So I worked on a lot of Sam Harris this week, and worked on figuring out what he believes about consciousness and discerning his philosophy of life. And a positive consciousness is what he's looking for. And this reminded me of C.S. Lewis's quip in The Problem of Pain. By the goodness of God, we mean nowadays almost exclusively his lovingness. And in this, we may be right. And by love, in this context, most of us mean kindness. And C.S. Lewis often notes when we reduce love to kindness, we're missing whole portions of what love is. The desire to see others than the happy self, not happy in this way or that, but just happy. That would really satisfy us. What would really satisfy us would be a God who says, of anything we happen to like doing, what does it matter as long as they are contented? We want, in fact, not so much a father in heaven as a grandfather in heaven, a senile benevolence who, as they say, liked to see the young people enjoying themselves, and whose plan for the universe was simply that it might be truly said at the end of each day, a good time was had by all. Now, I've been doing a lot of thinking about consciousness in the last couple of weeks, and consciousness is this funny thing. It's this cloud of awareness that we pass from moment to moment, and sometimes these can be pain, sometimes these can be pleasure. Often we fall into despair. Consciousness is a very powerful thing in human beings, and so what we often try to do is differentiate the self a little bit from consciousness, and have that self have a little bit of historical awareness and a little bit of ballast and a little bit of balance. But often that self just stands a little bit apart of the consciousness, looking at it, evaluating, judging, wanting, planning, trying to control or manage. And truth is, we're not terribly good at this. We are not transparent to ourselves, nor in control even of ourselves very much. We have repeated admonitions to eat right and exercise, to save for college or retirement, to consider your next life, perhaps, if you're religious, or the world you're leaving the children if you're irreligious, so the environment, the national debt, what have you. But we seldom do any of this. And in fact, and even when we do it, the best plans we have fall apart. I've mentioned in last week's sermon this Walter Scheidel book, The Great Leveler. We worry about economic inequality, and what we often find is that the differences between governments make relatively little difference. It's just tinkering. And then you look at, say, Yuval Noah Harari's vision of the future. There's a reason we're anxious inside. This Shakespeare quote comes to mind: "Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war." That seems to be where all of our imaginations go in the future. Walking Dead, zombie apocalypse, environmental degradation. Now, we've been talking about the rise and fall of the kingdom, and we've seen that this in our long journey through the Old Testament, from Judges, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. We see the rise of the kingdom and good kingdom David. Oh, here's Freddie. And then we have Solomon, and David tells Solomon to stay faithful to God and murder your enemies. And then Solomon's reign is imaged like the kingdom of God coming. The temple is rebuilt. It's the Garden of Eden. It's heaven and earth meet. It's God's presence on earth. And Solomon asks for wisdom. But then Solomon himself falls and is corrupted. And he's corrupted by the pagan foreign wives. He enslaves his own people. He amasses great wealth. And then the kingdom splits over taxes. Now, and we talked last week about how the fact that even in the Bible, Ahab is an image of an evil kingdom and an evil king, kind of the paradigmatic evil king. Israel was doing great. Israel was prosperous. Israel was subduing its neighbors. It was keeping Aram down. And Elijah, of course, arose and complained and called out and destroyed the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, but then ran away in terror. And God tells him, you need to anoint Elisha, you need to anoint Hazael, and you need to anoint Jehu. And Elisha reluctantly only does 1/3 of the job that he's asked. Now, what we're about to do is a lot of reading in this story, and the thing that probably will capture your minds is what is at stake in these stories. But a better question might be, when was it at stake and for whom? You see, consciousness is the cloud of now, but there are many, many nows and many, many people. And what we tend to do is project ourselves into that. And one of the questions that we might ask is that, well, what were they doing? Are there any temples of Baal around today? Why not? Well, history is written by the winners, but is Jehu the winner we're looking for? The prophet Elisha summoned a man from the company of prophets and said, tuck your cloak in your belt, take this flask of olive oil with you, and go to Ramoth Gilead. When you get there, look for Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi. Go to him, get him away from his companions, and take him into an inner room. Then take the flask and pour the oil on his head and declare, this is what the Lord says, I anoint you king over Israel. Then open the door and run. Don't delay. Now Ramoth Gilead is where King Joram is fighting a battle, and he's got King Ahaziah from Judah with him there too. And so General Jehu is there, but there's obviously stuff going on. And now notice the commands of Elisha are pretty sparse. And it seems like the young prophet that Elisha sends is about to add a little bit of interpretation into the mix. The young prophet went to Ramoth Gilead, and when he arrived, he found the army officers sitting together. I have a message for you, commander, he said. Which of us? Asked Jehu. For you, commander, he replied. Jehu got up and went into the house. Then the prophet poured the oil on Jehu's head and announced, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over the Lord's people Israel. You are to destroy the house of Ahab, your master, and I will avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the Lord's servants shed by Jezebel. The whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off Ahab, every male in Israel, slave or free. I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah. As for Jezebel, dogs will devour her on the plot of ground at Jezreel, and no one will bury her. Then he opened the door and ran. Wow. A little bit more than Elisha told him. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because you remember that Samuel goes and anoints David. What does David do right then? In fact, what is David reluctant to do all along? Why doesn't David assassinate Saul? In fact, part of the whole focus of the book, the early parts of the book of Samuel, is on about David and precisely this point. But now we should pay attention to Jehu, and we should pay attention to corruption, because if the house of Ahab or the house of Omri were noble, wonderful, loyal kings, well, what would their servants be? How would their servants feel? Or is the world really dog eat dog, each one to their own consciousness? When Jehu went out to his fellow officers, one of them asked him, is everything all right? Why did this maniac come to you? Now pause. This young prophet, he's a maniac. Pay attention to the words. The Hebrew scribes were masters of words. Maniac? And so much is in this, and so much of the context is in this one little interchange. It's amazing, amazing literature. You know the man and the sort of things he says, Jehu replied. Oh, those priests, oh, those not the priests, the prophets. Oh, those prophets, oh, those religious people. Oh, Jehu's going to get plenty religious, but in a certain way. Jehu replied, that's not true. They said, tell us. Jehu said, here's what they told me. This is what the Lord says. I anoint you king over Israel. They quickly took their cloaks and spread them under him on the bare steps. Boy, did they cave fast. Boy, where's their allegiance? What kind of structures do our dog eat dog, everyone for themselves? It's my happiness that is most important. What kind of structures does this really create? Where is the loyalty? Where is the sacrifice? Where is the honor? Where is, dare I say, even the religion that we might call nationalism or loyalty or any of those religions? They blew the trumpet and shouted, Jehu is king. Oh boy, they're all in on the plot now. So Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. That didn't take much. Did God tell him to turn? David didn't turn. Now Joram and all Israel had been defending Ramoth-Gilead against Hazael, king of Aram. But King Joram had returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds the Arameans had inflicted on him in the battle with Hazael, king of Aram. Jehu said, if you desire to make me king, don't let anyone slip out of the city to go and tell the news in Jezreel. The plot is unfolding. The coup is underway. They got into his chariot, and then he got into his chariot and rode to Jezreel, because Joram was resting there, and King Ahaziah, king of Judah, had gone down to see him. Oh, pause. Where's my cursor? Oh, where was I? That wasn't even Freddie. That was someone else. Sometimes it's hard to get your work done. Okay, so Jehu gets into his chariot and he rides to Jezreel because Joram was resting there and King Ahaziah of Judah had gone down to see him. When the lookout standing on the tower in Jezreel saw Jehu's troops approaching, he called out, I see troops coming. Get a horseman, Joram answered. Send him to meet them and ask, do you come in peace? The horseman rode off to meet Jehu and said, this is what the king says. Do you come in peace? What do you have to do with peace? Jehu replied. Fall in behind me. The lookout reported. The messenger has reached them, but he isn't coming back. So the king sent out a second horseman. When he came to them, he said, this is what the king says. Do you come in peace? Jehu replied, What do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me. The lookout reported. He has reached them, but he isn't coming back either. The driving is like Jehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a maniac. The same root word gets repeated. The prophet, the king has turned into a prophet. Not unlike Saul. Not unlike David. But Jehu and David are very different. We've already seen the contrast between Jehu and David. There's a lot more similarity between Jehu and Saul. Hitch up my chariot, Joram ordered, and then he hitched it up. Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, rode out, each with his own chariot, to meet Jehu. They met him in the plot of ground that belonged to Naboth the Jezreelite. Remember Naboth? Look up Naboth. What happened with Naboth? Wasn't Ahab blubbering like a child, and Jezebel comes to Ahab and says, why are you crying? You're king. Just take his vineyard and turn it into your vegetable garden. That's what you should do. And they concocted a legal religious excuse to have Naboth killed. Then Joram saw Jehu. He asked, have you come in peace, Jehu? How can there be peace, Jehu replied, as long as all the idolatry and witchcraft of your mother Jezebel abound? Oh, Jehu's got religion. Then Jehu drew his bow and shot Joram between the shoulders. The arrow pierced his heart, and he slumped down in his chariot. Jehu said to Bidkah, his chariot officer, pick him up and throw him on the field that belongs to Naboth the Jezreelite. Remember how you and I were riding together in the chariot behind Ahab his father when the Lord spoke this prophecy against him? Yesterday I saw the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declared the Lord. I will surely make you pay for it on this plot of ground, declares the Lord. Now then, pick him up and throw him on that plot, in accordance to the word of the Lord. When Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw what had happened, he fled up the road to Beth-Hagan. Jehu chased him, shouting, "Kill him too!" They wounded him in his chariot on the way up to Gur near Ibleam. But he escaped to Megiddo and died there. His servants took him by chariot to Jerusalem and buried him with his ancestors in his tomb in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, son of Ahab, Ahaziah had become king of Judah. Just to keep the timing straight. When Jehu went to Jezreel, When Jezebel heard about him, she put on eye makeup, arranged her hair, and looked out the window. Oh my. So few words, so much meaning. As Jehu entered the gate, she asked, "Have you come in peace, you Zimri, you murderer of your masters?" She's trying to recapture her beauty, and she's trying to grasp at morality, but her beauty and her morality both wear thin. He looked up at the window and called out, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 of 3 of the eunuchs looked down at him. Now, the fact that these are eunuchs is important, because anyone following the law of Israel would not have made eunuchs, because it was, in fact, against the law of Israel to create eunuchs. Why? Eunuchs were a standard part of turning slaves into loyal, permanent slaves by giving them no future, by literally cutting them off. Will they be loyal to Jezebel, these eunuchs? Will the conventional wisdom of all the foreign empires hold with Jehu? "Throw her down," Jehu said. So they threw her down, and some of her blood splattered the wall and the horses as they trampled her underfoot. Ghastly. Jehu went in and ate and drank. "Take care of that cursed woman," he said, "and bury her, for she was a king's daughter." Didn't have that much mercy for the king. But when they went out to bury her, they found nothing except her skull, her feet, and her hands. Remember Dagon, the idol of the Philistines, when they put the Ark of the Covenant in his temple, and how his head and his hands are cut off the second time? They went back and told Jehu, who said, "This is the word of the Lord, that he spoke through his servant Elijah the Tishbite. On the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs will devour Jezebel's flesh. Jezebel's body will be like dung on the ground in the plot of Jezreel." Ever see your dog eat poop? "So that no one will be able to say, 'This is Jezebel.' She won't even have a tomb." Now there were in Samaria 70 sons of the house of Ahab. So Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the officials of Jezreel, to the elders and the guardians of Ahab's children. Will they be loyal? Will they have some inner core that leads them to sacrifice? No. He said, "You are your master's sons. You have your master's sons with you, and have chariots and horses, a fortified city and weapons. You have a fighting chance. Now, as soon as this letter reaches you, choose the best and most worthy of your master's sons and set him on your father's throne. Then fight for your master's house. Servants of the house of Ahab, of the house of Omri, be men." No, they won't. There's no there in this kingdom. There's no nobility. It's only corruption. It's everyone for himself and the happiness of his consciousness. But they were terrified and said, "If 2 kings could not resist him, how can we?" So the palace administrator, the city governor, the elders, and the guardian sent a message to Jehu. They all cave. This kingdom is corrupt from the inside. We are your servants, and we will do anything you say. We will not appoint another king. You do whatever you think is best. General Jehu. Then Jehu wrote a second letter saying, "If you are on my side and will obey me, take the heads of your master's sons and come to me in Jezreel by this time tomorrow." Now the royal princes, 70 of them, were there with the leading men of the city who were rearing them. When the letter arrived, these men took the princes and slaughtered all 70 of them. They were slaughtered, the boys that they had been raising like sons. There is no core to this kingdom. There is only corruption. There is no character. There is no loyalty. There is nothing. Well, what is this connected to? The eunuchs? To Jezebel? They put their heads in their baskets and sent them to Jehu and Jezreel. When the messenger arrived, he told Jehu, and they put their heads, they have brought the heads of the princes. Then Jehu ordered, put them into 2 piles at the entrance of the city gate until morning. Standard operating procedure for the ancient Near East. And then the bloodbath continues. There will be a link here between Ahaziah and Jezebel, as you can see, because Athaliah, Jezebel's daughter, has become a queen in the southern kingdom. God is cutting this off. God is cutting this out. Jehu lures all the prophets and worshippers of Baal into the temple in Samaria and slaughters them, destroys the temple of Baal, and as the scribes that wrote the book of Kings note, it was continued to be used as a toilet to that day in Samaria. So when he left there, he came above Jehonadab, son of Rechab, who was on his way, and Jehu greeted him. Are you in accord with me as I am with you? I am, Jehonadab said. If so, he said, give me your hand. So he did, and Jehu helped him up into the chariot. Jehu said, come with me and see my zeal for the Lord. Then he had him ride along in the chariot, and when Jehu came to Samaria, he killed all who were left there of Ahab's family. He destroyed them according to the word of the Lord spoken to Elijah. This zeal will be a powerful thing in the story of Israel. And everyone will look to Jesus to have this kind of zeal. And Paul had this kind of zeal, and he used this zeal to persecute the followers of Jesus. Back again to Jacques Ellul, who notes the strange thing in this book where prosperity and good times reign with the evil kings, and now with, well, nobody's really going to call Jehu that good. The kingdom is a severe disappointment because Hazael continues to reign in on the northern kingdom. And in fact, things get so bad that the sons of Jehu will have to call the king of Assyria for aid against the king of Aram. The house of Jehu was the longest reign in the north. In that sense, the most successful. But they never gave up the golden calf cult to the Lord. Hazael ravages Jehu's house, and the sons of Jehu brought in the Assyrians to get relief from Hazael. The Assyrians would eventually destroy the northern kingdom. What seemed like the beginning of a happy story for Jehu was a very unhappy story. It didn't go well, even for his sons. Jehu grabs the throne, but the throne isn't what he hopes it will be. Now we read the text with our little moral consciousness, and we sit here and we judge God for not maximizing the happiness of all the characters in the story. Isn't that what God should be about? Well, what have we learned in this moment of reflection? Well, we've learned exactly what our God is and who we imagine him to be. And these are the judgments that we use to judge the story that we read. Are we really just projecting ourselves into the story, imagining ourselves as the occupants of Samaria or Jezreel, and we're like people channeling our past lives? Well, I used to be a prince in Samaria. Ooh, bad choice. Don't we do this every time we go to the movies? Haven't we been culturally conditioned to do this? Well, what is morality? The house of Omri, Ahab, and Jezebel all function with the goal of their conscious happiness, getting what they want. We might not like their methods, but we certainly share their goals. The house collapses because everyone else is doing the same thing. If Jehu looks to be winning, I'm going to pause and edit now. If Jehu seems to be winning, well, throw the queen out the window. Probably a little upset about what has been done to them to make them eunuchs Well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Maybe they're just planning on being faithful eunuchs for Jehu's household. What will Jehu do with all of the mess left behind by the house of Omri? Jehu is a dog of war. That's exactly who he is. And God unleashes him on the northern kingdom. They wanted to be just like the other kingdoms, and they were exactly like the other kingdoms. And the turnover of power is exactly like everyone else. It's the same game played over and over and over again. Nothing matters. There is no moral core. Jesus says, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. What would it look like to be different? What would it look like to be different from this? And now we all have tastes of this. I mean, if you just watch almost any movie, you prize the person who is noble, who can resist themselves, who is sacrificial. And, maybe I'm a little too unkind to Sam Harris, because from what I see, Sam Harris has some of those qualities. Many, many, many of us do. And what I think is that he doesn't, I'm glad he lives better than the poverty of his philosophy. Because you would have to willingly embrace a sacrificial suffering for others. And you would have to call that good, as we commonly and normally do. This is the kind of thing that we do. You would have to know that your suffering would, in the very long term, accomplish something good, even on the level of good consciousness for others. I'm not saying good consciousness is a bad thing. It, in fact, is a worthy goal and a worthy thing, but it cannot be the central goal. What would living this way cost you? Well, now we see why we don't. If you live this way in order to save yourself morally, well, that's a little bit easier, because, again, we're self-centered, and it doesn't undo our self-centered nature. It would undercut your own moral effort, in fact. It would be selfish and transactional. To do it for others would cost you everything, because there's no end to what the world will take if you let it in the door. Does that make any sense? What if someone did it for you, however, because you couldn't do it for yourself? What would you think of such a person? What if, in fact, someone had done it for you, and maybe you're not too cognizant of it, you're not too aware of it, you're not terribly in touch with it? What would be the best way to say thanks, to say thank you for such a gift? What would be beautiful? What would be noble? What would be heroic? Can you see all the qualities that the Baal cult had so hollowed out of the northern kingdom? You get later on into the book of Ezekiel, and Ezekiel will say, what's true in the temple gets played out in the streets of the city. And that's almost always true. Isn't that what Sun Tzu says? This isn't new information. This is stuff we all know. But could there be a man who gave himself for others? The best man would, of course, have to be a perfect man. And the best sacrifice would, of course, have to be an unjust sacrifice, one where his life was taken from him, but it would have to, at the same time, be a willing sacrifice. And again, anybody who's listening to this, who's been reared in the Christian Reformed Church at least 50 years ago, will know this sounds like the Heidelberg Catechism. Misery, deliverance, gratitude. Isn't this all those same things? What if the person who did it for you demonstrated resurrection and promised it to you too? In other words, it is not irresponsible to voluntarily give your life, your time, your money, your interest, your devotion, your allegiance. Those things are not irresponsible, because actually we wring our hands about how all those people died, and rightfully so. We wring our hands at the unjust death of people today, rightfully so. Death takes all. It's only a matter of timing, and it's a matter of how. And those things matter. I don't want to diminish those things. But what are you really trying to save? And what do you really have to lose? And what would be the most noble, the most beautiful, the most honorable, the best way to spend your life. This story of Jehu is one servant rebelling from his master after another, and it's contrasted with a David who had every reason to kill Saul and wouldn't. Well, maybe this says something about David. Maybe this is why, and David was not a perfect man, maybe this is why David at least is a better king than Jehu or Ahab or Joram or Ahaziah. Maybe we're beginning to see the structure of this world here, and maybe we're beginning to see what the greatest king would look like. And shouldn't we want to follow the greatest king? What if a person did this for you?